Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Amazon Maturity Matrix webinar. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes. It's 2 minutes to. We'll get started right on time. I'm Kiri from Bobsled Marketing, and I've got Gary Hammerschlag from Bobsled Marketing on as well. Hi, Gary.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. Good to see you again. We've been hanging out a lot this week.
Likewise, I know. It's great.
So while we wait for everyone to join, we'll do a little bit of a virtual icebreaker. If you haven't been to a webinar on this platform before, Webinar Ninja, it's just chat-based. So there's a chat section. You can ask us questions. We would like to take questions throughout the webinar, so pop them in the chat. So just to check that everything's working for everyone, we start to get that chat going. Got an icebreaker question, which is if you could only have 3 apps on your phone, what 3 apps would you have on your phone? I like to think back to 2008 when I got my first iPhone. You only had 8 gigs of storage on it, so about 3 apps was about as much as it could handle. So thinking back to 2008, what 3 apps would you have on your phone, Gary?
So for me, I was kind of thinking about this. I'm a big family guy. I have family all over the world and overseas. So for me, WhatsApp is when WhatsApp came around and being able to communicate and not pay $6 for a text message, to South Africa or Australia.
Yeah.
That changed the game. So WhatsApp is definitely one. What else? I'm a huge wildlife lover. There's an app called Latest Sightings that allows you to sort of track movements of animals in wildlife reserves in Southern Africa. So that one I would definitely need to keep. And then I would say a toss-up between ESPN or Instagram. Totally different, but I don't know. Maybe Instagram for some light, hearted sort of nonsense.
Nice.
Yeah.
Some brain downtime. Good stuff.
Yeah. And yourself?
Getting some good answers in the chat here. This is kind of a test to make sure. This is our technology test before we start the webinar. Audible, Skype, and WhatsApp. Angry Chris Berry. Angry Birds and Clubhouse. I love that. We're still talking about 2008, Chris. Missive, Slack, and Chrome. I've never heard of Missive before. I'll have to check that out. Carla, Strava user. Love it. All right, well, let's get started. I'm going to pull up the slides here. It's just gone 11. So for people who've just joined, I'm Kiri from Bobsled, and Gary Hammerschlag is my co-host today. We are talking about some research that we've recently launched at Bobsled that we've been working on for about 5 months now.
Yeah.
And it's about the concept of Amazon maturity. So we're going to get into some archetypes that we identified through our research, some very practical things that you can do as a brand to help your company accelerate through the various stages of Amazon maturity. And throughout the presentation today, we'd really like to take questions as we go along. So you'll be able to find that chat section. Just pop your questions in and we'll answer them along the way. So at Bobsled, we are a solution provider, a service provider for brands who want to grow on Amazon. We do a lot of strategy work, we do a lot of implementation, but we also try to take our findings and best practices to educate the industry. We did this session yesterday with our clients at Bobsled to give them a sneak preview and a little bit more of an intimate experience, but we like to take what we've learned day to day with clients and bring that back to help move the industry forward. So you're going to get a copy of the research after the call. There is also a tool that we've developed for you to do your own self-assessment of where you're at, your company is at in their maturity journey. So more goodies coming after the call that you'll get by email. So I'm going to just open up before we get into what that research looked like and what our findings were. We'll start out with a story. And this is a couple of years ago, I had a Zoom call with a prospective client of Bobsled, and let's just call her Mary. And Mary was a category manager for a personal care brand and had been tasked with identifying and standing up new growth channels for the brand. They already had a vendor relationship with Amazon, but were really struggling with growing that channel. And at first, Mary assumed that was because they didn't have a regular contact with a vendor manager at Amazon, someone that they could lean on to place POs and things like that, just like their other retail channels. But as we talked a little bit further, I realized that was far from the root of Mary's real problems. Mary said things like, the executives at my company are fairly dismissive of Amazon as a growth opportunity. No one else in my company really understands e-commerce marketplaces. I'm a team of one. There's no marketing budget for channels outside of our key retail accounts. Now, in my head, I'm thinking, geez, if I was Mary, I'd be hightailing it out of there and going to a company that had a real vision for the future. But to her credit, Mary stayed the course with that company and kept chipping away at the status quo. And eventually there were some internal leadership changes. And of course, with the pandemic, Amazon and other e-commerce marketplaces were finally recognized as ways to reach customers and grow their reach. So ultimately, Mary was vindicated, budget opened up, and real goals were identified to grow the channel. So what happened here? I think with hindsight, I think Mary's company would agree that they had been stuck in the past in hindsight, and that there was no chance that they could grow over the long term without having a e-commerce marketplace strategy. Now, unfortunately, when I first spoke with Mary, we couldn't really help her at Bobsled. It's not really what we do to come blazing into board meetings and telling brands that they must change or die. The root of Mary's problem was that her company wasn't engaged with this channel and it had no ability to execute on the opportunity in front of them. They were not ultimately mature in their thinking or ability around the Amazon sales channel. And that's what we're going to talk about today, this concept of Amazon maturity and what you can do in a tactical way to actually move your company forward to maturity. So at Bobsled, we're a very process-driven company. We use the same processes and knowledge base to manage all of our client accounts. But over time, we've noticed big differences in the outcomes of some clients who just seem to behave differently. They approach their Amazon channel in a unique way. They assessed growth opportunities differently. So last year in September, such a long time ago, we decided to focus our research time on answering this question. So I'm going to pass over to Gary, who's part of our research team, to share our approach.
Yeah, thanks, Kiri. So as Kiri mentioned, when we looked at our approach for this research and our process, we started with we scored and analyzed nearly 100 clients at Bobsled to really determine their relative Amazon maturity. And we matched that maturity up with overall outcomes from their Amazon sales channel. We had 20 clients provide input from their own self-assessments, which really gave us data and that starting point to really be able to dive in and analyze all these results. And really, over the last 7 years as Amazon consultants, we've been able to, be lucky enough to observe the relationships, between clients and what, their stated goals are and how their companies are organized, and really all the way through to their eventual outcomes and hopefully success on Amazon. So if we look at what you're seeing now, this was the core of everything for us. So this is our Amazon maturity matrix. And when we culled through all the data that we had, what we found is that brands that have a more mature approach to their Amazon channel, they need to be superior in two dimensions, both engagement and execution. So when we look at engagement first, right, brands that are engaged, they've got a clear vision and objective for their Amazon channel. There's top level buy-in, meaning a lot of the brands that we sometimes speak to, we have a point of contact, but they're not the real decision makers, and they have to go back for approval or budget approval, etc. And really having that top level buy-in engaged in the brand's success is really imperative. And then just genuine curiosity about the channel. Are asking for reports, asking for figures, are you involved, what's going on, and participating in strategies that are offered by ourselves, and maybe not even participating in that strategy, but having a healthy debate about it, just being involved. All these really factor into what we see as an engaged brand. And following that, we've got the execution side of things, and these brands have the resources to support their Amazon strategy, right? These resources might be, include time or the commitment to the platform, commitment to learning it, and really a realistic budget around it. And those factors play an enormous role in whether a brand can truly execute. And for myself, like if I'm thinking about that engagement and execution, I have a client that I work with that really kind of immediately comes to mind, like really involved in Slack and emails, and they take part in beta programs that are offered, whatever they can get their hands on, they want to be involved in. They're always looking to grow, like that, grow their top line, grow their awareness. And really, in addition to their massive engagement, which is like infectious, which is great, they are able to execute on items that are presented to them. So like going into Q4 this past year, we knew we wanted to hit certain goals. So that really meant planning that a little bit, before that, end of Q3. And, what I presented them, they were able to execute on that strategy immediately. And being able to execute like that, we saw, a year over year of like 36% growth in Q4, which was really a statement to their engagement and their ability to execute, on these factors. So when we scored and we mapped out our clients on this matrix, we found some very common characteristics between them. They all acted in similar ways, whether that was driven by the company's vision and goals or competitive landscape around them. And for myself, growing up in South Africa and being a very huge wildlife lover, like I kind of mentioned, that's the app that I would keep. I drew on my experiences in the parks and reserves to help identify these Amazon archetypes. And when we look at them, first we have the lion, the big Madonna, right? This is the apex animal that all brands aspire to be. We also then have the chameleon, the spider, the caterpillar, who all have issues with either engagement or execution that's holding them back from reaching that milestone on Amazon. So I think first I'd like to, let's start with the lion. So high engagement, high execution. And, when we think of a lion, we know that they move fast, they pivot when they need to. A lion's success is really within the pride, right? Each lion knows the strategy and they take calculated risks, and they don't necessarily waste their energy on small opportunities. These brands, are actively engaged from the inside out. They've got a clear vision and goal for what they see their Amazon channel to be. And what separates these brands from the pack is their ability to really take action quickly. And for that, this requires both the ability to be decisive, as well as the ability to really execute on an opportunity, really at the, snap of a finger. And, the goals for these brands are clear, like a Pride of Lions, like each member, knows how they fit into playing into that overall larger strategy. And, being decisive and fast really does require engagement at the top level. So, I have a particular client of mine, the CEO of the company. I have bi-weekly calls with him, and he wants to really know everything that he can about his account, right? So sales, splits, what performed better, what's going on the platform, competitors, like you name it, he's asking. And, through that sort of healthy conversation that we have and suggestions that I provide, the response is never like, can I check and let you know, or I'll get back to you. There's always a decisive answer, and, being able to execute on that strategy immediately, and to see the engagement as well as the execution of this brand is undoubtedly factored into the success they see today on Amazon. So if we move over to the spider, right? So high engagement, low execution. Spiders, they can get stuck in their own web of bureaucracy. And as well, spiders make silk. They've got this opportunity to do great things. So these brands are actively engaged. They know, what and where they want to go, and there's total commitment to Amazon. But, what's preventing them from reaching their goals is their speed to execute on these items. Maybe it's internal friction that plays a huge role in execution. Sometimes decisions, take a long time to be made. Maybe it's unclear on who's, accountable for what task to be completed. And other times, simply, it could just be due to a lack of resources. Either, the internal team is too busy, or there's just not enough budget to execute the items, presented. And, this always makes me kind of think, right? The spirit is willing, but the follow through is weak. And, I work with this one brand, huge growth aspirations, always looking to grow, but due to internal issues, right, with like capacity and priorities, these action items that we hope to be, done in a day or two can sometimes be sidelined and take months. And, when you have like multiple action items, even if they seem small, that are tabled because of this low execution, the brand's full potential is never realized due to the sort of slow speed to execute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just want to add something in here too, which is we talked about bureaucracy as one of the Achilles heels of the spider. The spider has heels, not sure about that. But the spider can get stuck in its own web of bureaucracy. It can also get stuck because there are not enough resources available, and they've sort of bitten off too much that they can chew. They're under-resourced in their e-com channel, whether with people or funding as well. So sometimes it's a bureaucracy issue, and sometimes it's a lack of resources.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's look at the chameleon. So, when we look at the chameleon, low engagement and high execution. So they're quite opportunistic rather than strategic. They sometimes lack vision. Brands are operating within this chameleon archetype are constrained by their lack of engagement or commitment to the Amazon channel. However, they do have the wherewithal and the ability, should they wish to really actually execute on these required tasks. These brands are often kind of like in a funny position because they actually have the budget and the capacity and the knowledge to be able to really like generate this enormous growth on the platform on Amazon. But, what they lack is that strong vision and internal resources to sort of how to go about it, which is really kind of key. And the most common way we see this play out, or ironically enough, is when brands they realize how important Amazon is and what an important piece of the e-com ecosystem it is. But either they just simply can't be bothered to be involved in the process, or they just don't have the time to really go through it. And again, I work with this one brand. They have the budget, they've got the knowledge, they've got the capacity to really execute pretty much on all action items put in front of them. But due to their the lack of returning messages, or being providing assets or asking questions, it's really hinders that enormous potential to generate that growth on Amazon. And sometimes, just looking back, this can come all the way from top level buy-in, right? Without that engagement, really can hinder a brand's performance.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the caterpillar, right? So low engagement, low execution here. Brands that we see fall into this quadrant, they lack, both vision and follow through. Amazon's not really viewed by the executives as a critical part of the company's future strategy, and resources aren't allocated to the channel, and a self-fulfilling cycle exists, right? So the Amazon channel is small, so it gets little attention and little resources, so it stays small. And that statement really reminds me of Mary's story that you were talking about, Kiri. It seems so simple, but yet so true, right? When it's small, you don't want to allocate resources, but when you don't allocate resources or give it attention, it stays small. And brands that are caterpillars, they're really easy pickings for more aggressive brands out there.
Yeah, definitely. So that is the overview of the maturity matrix framework that we came up with, and the animal archetypes that kind of bring those quadrants to life. I'll just go back a few slides just to bring that up. So we've got our engagement axis and our execution axis, and the lion is where we want to be. The lion is the most mature archetype of all of these. And so we're going to spend the next section of the webinar talking about the lion, the habits of the lion, and lessons that we can learn from the lion, and understanding that with those quadrants, with those archetypes, they're not fixed forever. We can be change makers in our organizations and help them to mature into lions with some of these lessons that we've pulled out here. So let's jump into these. The first lesson here is that lions track meaningful KPIs. And just to take a step back here, even before figuring out what those KPIs are, you need to be clear on the ultimate objective of the Amazon sales channel. Is it profitability, or is it market share or revenue growth? Growth or profitability? And it's no better or worse to have a profitability orientation or a growth orientation. The important thing is to be clear on what the company's priority is and focus efforts on achieving KPIs that are consistent with that priority. What we see a lot at Bobsled is companies not understanding that there's a trade-off between growth and profitability objectives. You want to launch, and if you're launching a brand on Amazon for the first time, it's not going to be profitable right away. You're going to need to spend to get to the top of search results. Your ad campaigns are not going to be super profitable from the start. So understanding what's the real objective here. Are we sort of at a mature stage in our life cycle as a brand, and so we're going for profitability, or are we going for growth because we want to win market share here? Some of the earlier questions I got from other sessions was that can you have both? And the exception I would make to my my pretty strong feelings about this is you can have within your product assortment a focus on profitability or growth within that assortment. So you might have a new brand that you're launching that's going to have a growth orientation versus perhaps the rest of the portfolio that's focused on profitability. So yeah, as Chris, thanks for speaking up. Goals and respective KPIs are everything. Sounds obvious, but it's not always executed by CPGs. Absolutely. So this is the first step in tracking meaningful KPIs. The second is understanding which KPIs tie back to each to a given objective. And so this is a framework that we've come up with after a lot of time looking at what metrics impact which goals. So you can see in the middle of this target diagram, we've got revenue growth goals and channel profitability goal. There are metrics that measure each one of those goals. And so one of the biggest sort of mismatches that we see is a brand really focused on ACOS or return on ad spend as a metric and always wanting to track that and drive that down. But their ultimate strategic objective is revenue growth or getting more market share. And those two things just aren't compatible. ACOS and return on ad spend is a very visible metric. It's easy to track. It's right there in front of you on any Amazon dashboard. But if your goal is revenue growth, that's not the right metric to be tracking. There's also within this diagram, you can see a concept of core metrics and influencing metrics. Some of these metrics influence others, like your average selling price is going to influence your average order value. And there's some relationships that can go in both directions. So this is a pretty simplistic view of how all of that works. But the point is to show you that knowing what your ultimate objective is and working back from there to understand what's driving that ultimate objective and what are the right metrics to be tracking, as opposed to which are the easiest metrics to get out of my Amazon dashboard, or which are the metrics that my consultant is giving me or whatever. Really being more strategic about what those metrics need to be. So that is this is something that we've gotten a lot of feedback on so far, this concept here. And what can you do if you're a e-commerce practitioner within a brand trying to move your company forward here? So I'd say 4 main action steps. 1, understand and define the primary goal of your company's Amazon channel. Is it growth or is it profitability? And really push for this if it's not clear. We're able to achieve very little toward a target if we don't know what the target is. So really insisting on an agreement on what that target should be. Number 2, making sure the goal is understood by all internal and external stakeholders. For example, Bobsled as an Amazon consultancy, we need to understand what the goals are of our clients. And sometimes because step 1 hasn't been taken, it's not even really clear to us. So explicitly stating what success looks like internally and externally. Number 3, revisit what metrics you're tracking in your Amazon scorecard and making sure they're consistent with the primary goal. Number 4, once metrics are clear, ensure there is clear and legitimate ownership of those metrics. Those owners should have the ability to affect results and make changes. Otherwise it's if no one's accountable, it's not going to get done. All right, moving on to line lesson number 2.
Yeah, thanks. So essentially, we want to see, brands look to harmonize sales channels, right? And what we've seen is non-mature brands, they seem to have turf wars between their D2C and Amazon. They sometimes sandbag resources. They have a one size fits all approach. Whereas when we look at, more mature brands, they cross-pollinate their best practices, including their assets, keyword research, copy, imagery, etc. They test unique assortments by channel, and they have that consistent but adapted message, really across all channels. So when we look at brands who are like true lions, they realize how important that omni-channel approach is, and how it's so important to really be consistent across all channels, but also understanding that, that need to adapt or tweak a little bit, per various channel, and how important it is. But that overall messaging and that overall cohesiveness is what really, where we really see those true lions.
Lesson number 3 is prioritizing Amazon in the supply chain. So in our analysis, we found that 85% of our mature clients prioritize Amazon in their supply chain efforts. And why is that? These mature brands appreciate the immediate and long-term risk of running out of stock on Amazon. There was some research from our friends at Profitero last year, which found that during the peak pandemic period, the rate of consumers switching from their traditionally bought brands, which are typically larger brands, that switching behavior grew by 75%. So if you're out of stock, you could kind of permanently be driving your customers into the arms of a competitor, and they might not come back to you. And also, secondly, while there's the immediate pain of being out of stock, where you're not actually generating any sales, of course, is that it takes 6 to 7 days to recover your organic search placement on Amazon when you've been out of stock for 2 or more days. So you're not just missing sales during that out of stock period, you're having to climb out of the valley on the way out. And that research is again from Profitero. So even if you're a brand whose in-store sales are important, you've also got to consider the showrooming effect of in-store customers using online data, especially things like Amazon product reviews and the very simple way to make comparisons on Amazon. They're using that e-commerce information to make buying decisions elsewhere. So in terms of action steps here, some things that we found to be important here is communicating and calculating internally the impact of Amazon stockouts. So using that model I mentioned of the cost of the stock out, and there are various ways to calculate that, communicating that internally, figuring out what that looks like, and sort of putting a number to the pain of stockouts. Something that we've seen, unfortunately, over the last year and a half or so is panic buying inventory. And that's, a pretty natural human response, I guess, to try and overcompensate for some of the supply chain issues. But particularly with Amazon, that can end up being particularly harmful because there's capacity restrictions at Amazon. And a lot of our clients have been caught out, unfortunately, when they've tried to overcorrect with inventory. And then finally, mapping out how your customer's journey is affected by stockouts on Amazon. It can be a very meaningful exercise to actually do a demonstration to an executive to show, hey, this is what Amazon's search results look like when we search for our brand and we're out of stock of our key product. Our competitors are bidding on our brand terms. We're not showing up, and here's which competitors are showing up. Really bringing to life what that customer journey looks like when you're out of stock can be a good way of getting that message across. So I'm just going to take a second here, Gary. You might have seen as well, I've got some comments coming in. Brandon says, out of stock is such a friction-filled experience that leads customers to abandoning brands and retailers. So true. And there is good data to evidence that as well. Are we going to elaborate on how we can calculate the impact of stock outs? Not in this webinar, Elizabeth, but there's really, in the report that you get afterwards, there is a great resource that we link up to that will help you there. So you can check that out. And Chris said, profitability versus growth, you can have a little of both by developing a unique fit for Amazon portfolio that is more profitable as a product without the risk of price matching, and then strategically invest in search media promo to grow more profitably. That's a great point. And that's something that some of our clients are doing right now as well, is a unique Amazon portfolio. Great point. And I just want to mention as well, Jason had a good question about resourcing as it relates to smaller companies or brands selling on Amazon, and we do address that in a few minutes. So we'll be sure to call that out when we get to that section, Gary.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, and just a quick point, like I just did a deep dive for a client on the importance of like what you were speaking about, out of stock, and it was eye-opening for them. So definitely something to absolutely keep in mind. So Lion lesson number 4, test and learn, and like why this is so important. Our most, Amazon mature clients, they really are willing to test all these new initiatives, but definitely in like a disciplined way, right? So we these brands, they've got certain requirements that they all have, like, internally for testing these programs. Does it align with their business objectives? A big one is they really do need to walk before they run. Their Amazon account is in, good standing. The channel is well optimized, before any further innovation starts. And this really does ensure that when testing does happen, that there is a larger chance of success. They often require quantifiable information or case studies, before they test to sort of, inform their decision. Really important. They measure results during and after the test. I know that seems so obvious, but really, and then use that data to make a decision whether it's the right thing to continue or not. These brands allocate 10% of their budget to new initiatives and tests. And really, for me, the most important is to recognize that, if at first, this test fails, really, like in life, not all future tests will fail. It's so important, so important to, continue to explore and test and remain curious. And it's really the way that we grow, like in life, right? We see what happens. We see the data. We learn from our mistakes. We gain from them. And I really think that that's such an important thing to keep in mind.
Definitely. Yeah, and those last 2 points kind of go back to each other. If you've got that 10% of budget allocated to a test and learn budget, you have to actually seek out new things and recognize that a lot of them are going to fail, and that 10% budget is somewhat of a gamble every time. So maybe it's not 10% for every brand, but it's a percentage you can sort of afford.
100%.
Yeah, exactly. Afford
Absolutely.
to lose. Okay, the 5th lesson, and we've got one more lesson after this, but lesson number 5, and I've got to give kudos to someone on the webinar today, Todd Hassenfeld. These came from you, Todd, in an interview that I did with you a few months ago. How to be an evangelist and get that buy-in all the way at the top. If you think back to my story about Mary at the start, there was no buy-in at the top of that organization. There was no belief in the Amazon channel, and that makes it very, very difficult to get resources and to get things done. So in the report that you'll get after the call, there's a longer list of tips and ideas of how to be an evangelist, but there's a concept that Todd shared with me, which is that e-commerce professionals need to be both a leader and a learner. So a leader is evangelizing and educating internally, and understanding that that it's going to take time for different people at different stages to understand what all the things that you might know. So no matter how you're teaching it, being patient and helping other people move along in their journey. And being a learner is keeping up with new information and tactics. And those two things obviously relate. You can share what you learn as you go along. Figuring out how people learn and engage with ideas, for example, doing some pop quizzes or gamifying some knowledge sharing. Number 3, presenting more options, including the cost of doing nothing. This is a favorite of ours, and it can be a really great way of reframing a conversation around that cost of doing nothing. So a new initiative that you think is going to really move the needle for your company, not just presenting, here's a new initiative that we think is going to be great, but here's what's going to happen if we don't do that competitively, the things that we won't learn, the data that we won't get, et cetera, et cetera. And then number 4, using familiar language and concepts. This is particularly helpful for more traditional brick and mortar retail focused brands, comparing digital concepts to traditional shopper marketing concepts like end caps, for example. What's the digital equivalent of an end cap? And making clear what is different between them as well. All right, and we've got our last lesson now, Gary.
Yeah, and just before I dive in, that cost of doing nothing, I know I mentioned it to you yesterday as well. So overlooked and so important. But yeah, so Lion, lesson number 6, don't let size get in the way. Bigger does not always mean better. It's, how we use what we have at our disposal that really does matter. And really what we found is that company size is not an indicator of maturity, right? So, rather small and large, companies, they each face their own unique challenges. Larger companies, they might have the deeper pockets, but maybe they suffer, like we talked about, from slower decision making, all the internal, kerfuffle, if you will, that's got to go around, and slower reaction time. Company size is all relative, right? So, I have a brand that I work with right now. They're doing $500,000 a month on Amazon. I also work with the brand that's doing $50K a month, right? They both, have meaningful goals, KPIs. They both faced their own unique challenges, but the smaller companies is equally as mature, right? The smaller company, they have the resources at their disposal. They're, able to pivot quickly. They have a very strategic and opportunistic view at the same time. It's clear that even though they may be a smaller company, they are like ferocious to get to the top. Their ferociousness really is larger than life. And for us, in the short window that we've been selling on Amazon, we've seen constant, at least minimum 15% month over month growth. And that is not, only going to increase, and it doesn't look to be slowing down anytime soon.
That's such a great story. And it reminds me of another one I'll share really quick. There's a bone broth company called Kettle and Fire. And during the start of the pandemic, especially with all the supply chain disruption, their main competitors big soup companies like Campbell's Soup, and Campbell's pulled all of their ads off of Amazon for a period of time, and it was Kettle and Fire's the opportunity of a lifetime for them to actually be able to bid and rank for their search terms while Campbell's was out of the game. And so they got really aggressive. They were able to pivot really quickly into that opportunity and recognize it for what it was. And they were able to maintain that position for a pretty long time on Amazon and really sort of build some momentum from being able to move quickly. So I think your points, lean into your strengths, whether large and small. If you're large, you've got a different advantage, which is having more resources, having more places to deploy them, being able to, that test and learn budget is going to look a lot larger, and you might be able to get in on some opportunities that smaller brands just don't have the capital or the resources to execute on. And then likewise, when you're small, leaning into that agility and having in some cases a more direct line into who your customer is. So yeah, don't let size get in the way. Lean into those strengths, whether you're large or small. All right, well, that's a wrap for today. I want to just share what you'll get in your email afterwards. There's the PDF of the report with the research that is officially live today. There is a replay as well. Feel free to share those out. And I want to also mention a tool that we developed alongside this research called the Amazon Savviness Scale. And this is a self-assessment that you can take. You get an instant score at the end, and it aligns with those concepts that we talked about around execution and engagement, and ask some questions around how do you integrate Amazon into your supply chain planning efforts? What kind of KPIs do you have? And based on your answers, you get an instant score just to see, put a finger in the air and see how you're going on your Amazon maturity journey. So that's a really simple tool that you can use to get a pulse check. And there'll be a link to that in the email that you'll get after this webinar. So I hope this has given you some ideas to consider in your own company. I hope you find that report helpful, and we're here to help if you have questions. Thanks for attending, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your Thursday.
Thanks, everybody.